Hello, and welcome to the Pro Series Conversations from CheckBox Pro. My name is Missy, and I'm the founder of CheckBox Pro, where we help school leaders become their most efficient and effective selves by matching them with ed-focused executive assistants. Each member of our team has over 10 years of experience in the education sphere, and though we may consider ourselves pros in some areas, we can't be an expert in every area. This is why we are excited to bring folks working in the education space to offer tools, tips, and insights to make the life of a school leader even more sustainable. My guest today is Laura Tierney. She's the founder and CEO of the Social Institute, a company which sets out to empower students and their role models to navigate social media and technology in positive, high-character ways. Prior to founding TSI, she worked at McKinney and ESPN in their marketing and social media departments. In 2018, Laura received the Triangle Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Award, and in 2022, she was named a finalist in the EdTech Leadership Awards, which recognizes leaders for outstanding contributions in transforming education through technology to enrich the lives of learners everywhere. She was a student athlete at Duke, so is a competitor at heart and loves a good game, which is why she devotes her work and passion to help students win at social media. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's great. Okay, so I come to our conversation today wearing two hats. The first hat is that of a founder of a company that works to help create sustainability for school leaders. So I'm deeply interested in trends and tech and like the ever-evolving landscape of education. And I'm definitely interested in anything that makes the lives of leaders and educators easier, more sustainable, and then therefore, by extension, right, it leads to higher achievement for students. The second hat I come to you wearing today is I'm a millennial, right, whose formative years were sans computer. Like we did not have a computer in our house until maybe middle school. I got my first cell phone at 15. I didn't get my first iPhone with like internet access until I was 23. Like I'm now a mom of two children and their world looks very different from mine, right? And I'm just preemptively concerned about social media and the role it's going to play in their personal and academic lives. So with that in mind, like my goal today is for our listeners, whether they be educators or parents, to just have a better understanding of like the impact that social media has on, young kids, or just, I should just say, adolescents, right? But in regards to their mental health and like their academic performance and just kind of how those two things, collide. And by extension, right, like how we as the adults in their lives, like can help them navigate this social media world in a really healthy way.
Yeah.
So with that being said, before we dig in really just like into the work that y'all are doing at the Social Institute and ultimately like why you started it, are you able to give us just like a high level overview of your research on the positive and the negative impacts of social media on a student's mental health and academic achievement? And I know that's big, but so take it whichever direction and break it down however you want.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. And I mean, one of the theories that we believe to be true at the Social Institute is that, if students aren't healthy, they can't learn. And social media definitely impacts the 5 inches between their ears. And in our approach and work with schools, we have definitely seen a correlation between like the impact on well-being, the impact on learning. Every year we survey students, and we survey students from elementary, all the way through high school. And last year we captured over 1 million responses that relate to like how students are behaving, interacting, engaging, connecting on social media, and like what that means for them. And so there were some really interesting things that stood out. We learned that students on average are getting their first cell phone. For you, it was around 15. For me, it was 13. They are getting it around age 11 today. And it's filling definitely their world with a lot of, dings, rings, and pings. And when we asked a specific question we posed to middle school students, to 7th graders, we ask them, you know, how soon do you feel like you need to respond to a text if you get that, you know, from a family member? And they said it just like felt like right away, like immediately. And even if they were doing something enjoyable or something that demanded their attention, they're feeling this like pressure to respond. And it's not just to friends, it's to family members too. And then another thing that we learned is that 75% of students say social media is their go-to source for how they get news, which of course you can say could be a pro, could be a con. It depends on like what news they're getting. And that trend line is it's like symbolic of a lot of our research, which is that there is a positive way to navigate this world, and there is a more negative way with a lot of landmines and pitfalls that you could step on or land in. And I just feel like it's our responsibility. We're giving them these devices, and school leaders are, you know, families are. We're giving them these devices that how can we help them just navigate it in positive ways? And if you are a teacher or a school leader being like, well, you know what, I'm really just focused on them getting like great grades. I want them to get great grades and graduate.
Yeah.
Again, students, if they're not healthy, they can't learn. And so much of this world impacts their focus, their time management, their attention, and therefore can impact their learning. So we're all on the same team.
Yeah.
Even if we have different goals and different outcome, you know, for our schools and our school cultures, it's so important to keep them healthy.
Yeah. So age 11 is, I don't know, I'm having like mixed feelings about it because I was thinking it was going to be younger. So I'm a little, part of me is like, okay, like, but also I'm still like 11, like that's like sixth grade, fifth and sixth, you know, like I'm like, they just still feel young.
Yes.
Like that's 5 years off for my daughter, which feels like no way, no how.
Right.
Um,
But they're still connected though. I mean, as you can imagine, like gaming,
yeah,
Apple Watches, like, so I think the first phone, uh, it's not, there's so many other ways that they're social, even like using Google Docs in elementary, and you're like typing things in, and that's your way of texting each other. So, I mean, you know, they're so
yeah.
synced up.
You know, you mentioned though, like the education piece comes because we're giving them these devices, right? Like, in which I think I'm 100%, right? If I'm going to give you anything, like if I'm going to give you scissors, I need to teach you how to use scissors. Like, I can't just be like, go forth. There are no guardrails, and I'm not going to, you know, so because they would be running with them, right? We have to teach them.
Right.
So, what's your advice then? I mean, because then, okay, is it that we should actually maybe then are we giving it to them too young? And so would we see a shift if, okay, well, we delay getting these devices until, yeah, they're 15, 16, whatever. Does that have a shift in potentially, yeah, you mentioned focus. And then, I mean, we haven't even really talked about cyberbullying, right? But like that piece I know is a front of mind for a lot of schools. You know, sleep, right? Because so many of them have them in their bedrooms. Like, is it just if we gave it to them later, we would be doing ourselves all a big service, or is it just that's a losing battle, so we have to just shift and go, well, the bulk of people are getting it, so we just need to, to go just educate. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, in my work with like school leaders, principals, assistant principals, counselors, and beyond, the light bulb went off when we started thinking of this as like, you know, social media is how students are social. It's not going away, and it's more than just, you know, Instagram and Snapchat. It's really how they're connecting through technology. And once you believe that to be true, then it's like, well, if it's not going away, yes, how do we give them a playbook, and how do we give them this playbook maybe in the most social setting possible, which is schools?
Yeah.
Because I think when students go home, you know, to their families, it's a more isolated learning experience, and you could easily say, well, this friend and this friend, they do things differently. Why can't I have access to that? And so if you can master the art of positive peer influence, I think you can really help students see like not everyone is using TikTok and not everyone is sleeping with their phone kind of in their bedside table. And you could start to use that peer influence for good rather than, for bad. And so we sat down with students and we were thinking like, well, what are the core skills that you should know as a student today? And with students, we came up with 7 of them. And in no particular order, they are helping students play to your core and playing to your core values and your character and what you click send on, and recognizing you represent something much bigger than yourself. Number 2 is protecting your privacy, kind of like you're famous, like the same way, celebrities will not share their geolocation at times or certain photos maybe of themselves. We have to keep things locked down or not take them or not share them. The third is strike a balance and balancing our time and attention on technology. Number 4 is cyber backing. It's the straight opposite of cyberbullying. It's about having each other's backs. 5 is find your influencers, and influencers doesn't just go for like who's on YouTube or who you're watching, your favorite gamer, but it's like thinking of the articles that you're surrounded by, the news that you're surrounded by, the brands that you're surrounded by. All of that is influencing you and your goals and your values and your beliefs. Using your mic for good is number 6. And we're seeing how students are speaking up and sharing their voice to help tackle problems they see in the world or in their community or in their school. And then number 7 is this idea of handling the pressure and knowing that there are so many different external pressures that come with technology that more than ever, you got to play to your core and build up core values, which is why, especially in the elementary years, like those extracurriculars, getting outside, like is all about building a child's core so they're not relying on technology too much from those early ages. But I love those 7 values so much, and I feel like even my day-to-day decision making with technology is rooted in those.
So these are student created. Like these are like a think tank of students. That's amazing. I mean, that's absolutely, I'm like, well, I could do some of these better.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
I feel like that would be a huge win too if adults, said, you know what, like I am a child's biggest role model, maybe alongside teachers and educators, but how can I live up to these 7 standards as well?
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition then for us. So, okay, so tell us a little bit about the Social Institute, what you all are doing to address these challenges around mental health and, academic performance, the cyberbullying, that social skills, that social network, all of those things. And maybe weave in there too, like, how did you get there? Like, just maybe give us a little bit of your background and founder's story.
Sure. Well, our team at the Social Institute, we partner with K-12 schools across the nation and now actually several countries around the world. And we use a unique, positive approach with students, one where you're talking with students instead of talking at them, and you're empowering and equipping rather than scaring and restricting. And we believe in not just helping students, but helping their role models too. So that includes families and educators. And, those 3 important groups of people are all on the same team and using technology positively. And so the idea for it came, I don't know, I feel like I'm the type of founder that you kind of live the problem yourself. And so you were just so passionate about solving it, and it feels like your life's work. I was 13 years old when I got my first phone, and I saw a lot of peers like trip up along the way. And I am from a very small town in Pennsylvania, and I use social media to follow role models who at that time were on the national team. And so I was, following people who I wanted to emulate and, be like, and then I ended up getting 3 out of my 4 jobs thanks to social media. In college, when social media started to emerge for brands, and I was like, this is so cool as a way of getting people to our sports games. I played sports in college, and I thought, gosh, this could be a tool for good. And so I felt like I was living that positive side of it when I saw a lot of people tripping up on it. And then when I worked in social media after college, I worked at ESPN, and ESPN asked me to start meeting with students to learn more about social media and to talk with them about what I was learning. And I was like, this is unbelievable. Like working with students about a topic that they're fascinated about. And I was learning a lot from them too, as I would meet with them. And the insight I uncovered was just they just felt like they were navigating this world without a playbook. And so I thought, gosh, how cool would it be to create this playbook, but to create it with students instead of a bunch of adults like huddling about this in a room on their own. And the adults don't use social media that much. And so I wanted it to feel just very authentic and student centric from the start. We built this like interactive technology that now schools use, and they use it in core classes or electives like health or community time. And it challenges students to brainstorm positive ways to navigate some of the trickiest social situations that they might encounter online and offline. And so, like most things as founders, it's like a labor of love. And um, we are just excited to keep helping more and more schools around it. But I think the problems though are evolving. Like it's now coming into AI and misinformation around, an election year. And it's like it's not stopping. The wave just keeps coming. And so it's an exciting problem to tackle for sure.
That's interesting. So, since we're kind of on that trend, I guess tell me a little bit more. You mentioned briefly, right? Like using this technology within the classroom, like be it a health class or whatnot. What does that practically look like? Are kids pulling out their phone? Like what, or is it,
What's
tell me more.
happening?
What does this look like?
Yeah. Um, yeah, so imagine, let's say I'm imagining I'm a eighth grade teacher, and you walk into my classroom, and I have something projected on the wall, and you're a student, and you walk in with your fellow eighth graders, and what's projected is it's saying like, take out your school laptop and enter in this code, and the students do that, and they're immediately connected to what I have projected on the wall. And then what I have on the what I have projected like goes through a series of scenarios and problem solving situations where the students are kind of playing together as a team, and they're voting on what they would do in different situations. And so the students could see how each other would handle different situations positively. And it's like a catalyst for conversation about how relevant is this in your life, and let's talk about it. And so um, one of the things that we wanted to balance is, I know there's a lot of phone bans going on across the
Yeah.
nation right now, and really like how do we limit screen time? And for us, it was a really exciting challenge to think about, like, well, how can you use tech for good? Because that's what we want students to be doing.
Right.
And could you have them voting kind of on things? And so you see the real live data, but for the most part, 80% of the time, students are like having discussion with each other, face to face, eyes up type of added style. So is that tracking? Are you?
Yes, I'm actually really, yeah, I think that would be great as somebody who's like had some version of like a homeroom, right? Like that's what I had at my middle school that I worked at, and we did these things on paper at the time, right? Like we hadn't quite had all the Chromebooks and things, but yeah. And I think to your point, like I used to drive through my neighborhood, and kids would be waiting at the bus stops on their phone, head down,
Yeah. Yeah.
standing right next to people they may or may not know, right? But there's certainly no chance of interaction because now I'm just looking at my phone. Versus my girls' school, they actually don't allow phones during during the school day. Um, and it's refreshing to kind of see them interact, right? Like it's like they crave that connection for sure. but so I like that this model that you're doing is actually creating that connection, that actual, like, how to look somebody in the eyeballs and maybe disagree, right? It's like, well, why would you respond that way? Like, that's not how I would respond, which is great. Like, we need to learn to have those conversations where we are disagreeing, and still get to walk down the hall together to our next class and be civil, right? And so I think that's a really smart way of introducing the curriculum into the building. I think that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and schools are taking it definitely a step further, and like, repetition is the mother of learning. And so how are you having these conversations regularly as a community? And what school leaders are finding is like, if you put the right framework in place, like this can impact culture, and
Yeah.
culture can impact learning. And so I think giving those moments for connection, and it's not just about it can be about a policy that you set for no phones, like that's wonderful. And can you also enable those catalysts for connection, like you're saying?
Well, and then, even a school that's having a ban, I would imagine those kids are leaving your building and have phones, right? Like they are, just because you don't allow it at school doesn't mean that they're not experiencing, which means that they still need the skills that could be taught at us through a curriculum that isn't like, it's like, okay, we're not using our phones here on campus, but I'm still going to teach you how to take your phone and be able to use it responsibly at home. Because guess what? I don't want to report, right, of bullying that's happening from things that's, of course, going to come find itself back into my building. And now I'm going to have to deal with it, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, I think and I mean, to your point, like, I think so much of it starts at home. And I think for us who have these moments where we know what it looks like to not have a phone, and then what it looked like. But I feel really bad for like the people who, their kids were the ones who got the iPhone first, and they're like, I actually don't know how to navigate this myself. And so I can't teach them. And so they are going to rely on their
Yeah.
schools, right? I mean, it's unfortunate schools get a lot of burden put on them, right? But
Yeah.
they have these kids for 8 hours a day, and it is, it's to your point too, like we're all on the same team. And so actually by schools helping our kids, it's gonna feed back into this positive loop and
Yeah.
cycle. So
It
um,
reminds me Missy, it reminds me of like a tip that I often think about being a parent of little ones, where obviously it's easy to say, hey, we're not gonna watch, Netflix. Netflix is bad. We're no Netflix, like for the rest of the month. Or you can say, you know what, we're gonna enable something, on Netflix that keeps our time limited on it. And you could turn off autoplay. So, when you're at the end of like a show on Netflix, and
mhm.
and then that thing is scrolling and it's like next episode in 5, 4, 3, and you're like, all right, fine, we'll watch another one. So it's like,
Yeah.
how do you take control of those moments? And I tell my team and my boys, like, CTC, like control the controllable. And there's so much of what we
Mhm.
can control with technology, that it's about helping students take control. And yes, a phone ban or a policy like that, certainly has control over when they do and don't use it. But can you also lean into empowering them to take control over it? Like you said so well, when they do leave school, they're going to have to work on schoolwork at home. And so how are you giving them that 21st century skill of knowing how to focus on their schoolwork while they get all those dings, rings, and pings? But now they know how to turn on focus mode and set a
Yeah.
really good focus mode on their device.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we've kind of covered a lot of this, but thinking about, you know, I'm trying to think like how I'm trying to get like, well, okay, maybe just talk to me a little bit because I'm sold on y'all. So what does it look like for y'all to collaborate with schools? Like what's that process look like? Um, how have you seen it work best?
yeah.
Let's start there. Let's start with like the school and y'all's relationship. And then I want to talk a little bit about like, then how does that carry over to home, and or do y'all have a different track or curriculum that's, okay, my school's not doing anything, but I at home need help, right? And is there a way for us to get those resources and kind of implement them just on a home front.
Yeah. Well, I think it's first, I think, important to recognize like the role of schools is evolving, and kind of building on what you said earlier. It's like schools also have to address, of course, the academic content, but also just students' life experiences that they're bringing into the school day. And so, um, the more that educators, I think, can just simply like uh align their goals with the goals of families, and parents around positive tech use is a great thing. And if you can inspire teachers to say, hey, let's have just huddles with students regularly, during the school day, during the school week, it empowers teachers to have these meaningful discussions and ultimately, help students build these life skills. And so I think teachers recognizing like, yeah, this is so much at the root of their culture, and that culture can just make school that much more exciting to attend. And it can impact, absenteeism and attendance and coming to school. It can impact a student feeling more confident for how they show up and how they do in their schoolwork and more, is really important. And so for schools, back to your question about how they can partner, they can certainly try to do this on their own. I think the challenge is this world is evolving so quickly, that how do you form partnerships that keep you at the cutting edge of what students are navigating? And so, and that goes for schools. It also goes for families. And so, our team at the Social Institute is certainly one option. There's other options out there, but my best advice would be to think of it as like a three-legged table, and you need education for the students. You need education for the students, you need education for the families, and you need education for the teachers. And if you could get those three groups on the same page with the help of a partnership, I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
For Missy, if I might add, this could get cut, but if I might add, families, the more proactive you could be with families, the better. And so in our partnership, it means like sending the latest apps that are trending home to families so that they could have conversations with their children about them. And even after you have this conversation in the classroom, sending something home to families saying, here's what your child talked about. It was like these three things. Have a conversation about that and continue the conversation at home. And then schools are really bridging that gap, which can be very meaningful. So families definitely play a key role.
Yeah. Do you have a success story of like how your, a curriculum, how your curriculum's like made a significant impact on, I mean, if you have maybe a student in mind, obviously not sharing their name, or like a school community where you're like, this is this is maybe a very particular problem they were trying to solve, and they kept seeing the same issues popping up, or I know I know y'all work with lots of people, so it might be hard to pull it out of your.
No, gosh, it's like, which direction do we go? I mean, one of my favorites is out in California, and the school has been using our work now, our lessons and our family resources for so long, that what they did was they also had student leaders having conversations like with the younger students. And so they built this like positive student mentorship kind of in the DNA of how this is rolled out. And that unlocked this kind of aha of like, wow, students looking up to other students is a really amazing thing. And but when zooming out of that specific example, at the end of every year, we survey, our partner schools, and, through self-reported data, look at the effectiveness. And, 89% of educators are saying that, they're observing even more active participation among students, including students who are usually more reserved and they don't speak up in class, or they don't speak up, but this topic is so relevant to them that they are opening up in really meaningful ways. And then, 90% of the educators are saying this is allowing me to just have a productive dialogue with students because of
how relevant it is for them. They're also noting like increase in empathy and like social awareness. And so I don't know, I asked the question like, what would a school look like if you could support the awareness, the agency, and the positive decision making of each student? Those three things are pretty incredible. And so qualitatively too, we've heard that from the schools that we're supporting.
Yeah. Thinking back to like those core values that you're like those students came up with. That first one that you mentioned, right, was like helping students like play into their core, like their core values. And I just think about that. I mean, it's for adults, and we have that conversation even at home, like, and we actually had a previous guest and was just talking about being able to show up authentically, right? And we feel our best, even when we have to have maybe hard conversations or to do hard things. But if the way we showed up in that moment was aligned with our core value, which is I'm honest, right? Or I'm kind and I show bravery, whatever that is. When when I'm able to do that, then to your point, right? It's like going to allow for them to stretch those muscles and then be able to put those into practice in more and more ways. And, just again, having awareness. I'm like, okay, what are my core values in this moment between this text or this comment or this person posted? And yeah, it's just all tied. That's awesome.
It
That's awesome.
is. And my heart goes out to the students because I think it's like, I think it's really easy, to say that of like playing to your core, but it's like you have pressure from every angle these days. And I so much believe, like you can't be what you can't see. And
Yeah.
so it's really hard to play to your core when you look around and you're seeing negative decision making and negative role models and negative media and so I think the more we can empower students to take control of that, it helps them build their core and then eventually, play to their core. But definitely can't be what you can't see. And social media and tech are huge parts of that.
There's this story, and it was, we grew up and you could like fall, like fall in the cafeteria, which is mortifying. You're just like, oh my word, like I just tripped, dropped my whole lunch on me. Like this is so embarrassing. And everybody laughs and chuckles, and it might live out the rest of that day, right? Now these kids, like with the phones, right? It gets caught on video.
Yeah.
And whereas once upon a time, this kid could maybe go home, share the story with his family over dinner and go, oh my word, this is so embarrassing. Can you believe it? Ha ha ha. Of course, they go, it's no big deal. It's fine. People are going to forget about it tomorrow. And they're like, okay, well, now they don't necessarily, right? Like they don't have that luxury anymore of, and again, it goes back to if people are using it in negative ways, right? But if they're if you have, but now it's like, oh, it's caught on video and now it's on loop, right? And it's been turned into a meme, and it's just like this thing that's shared around. And it's like what should have lasted for moments can now stretch, and it becomes this kid's like
Yeah.
embarrassing moment turned into like embarrassing weeks, right? It just like, how do you, and so having and creating a culture where it's like I think you said cyber backing, right? Like for your community of peers to be able to shut something like that down, like no adult is going to be able to do that. Like I couldn't come in and just, okay, I'm going to take it off. No, it has to be your peers that come into your aid to say like, not cool. Like we don't do that. I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to repost it. I'm not going to whatever, because that's not going back to our core values. That's not cyber backing somebody. And so it's just interesting that even they started to see like, oh, this is a way for us to stop it for one another.
Yeah.
It'd be cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
And there's I mean, I think you're touching on such a relatable scenario that is impacting so many students, and there are just, I think, warning signs certainly to look out for if your child or a student is impacted by the scenario you just described or others. But it's certainly like, notice if they're becoming upset or angry or, about as they think about the school day and things, as you're asking them questions about it, if they're withdrawing from
typical, their friend group or family, or if they're reluctant to participate in school activities that they once loved, or not, no longer wanting to go to school because they woke up to a terrible group chat being sent about them. And us adults wouldn't want that, let alone, the brain of a 12-year-old having to navigate that. And so your heart just, adults laugh, we didn't have to navigate this, but it really is something that we have the resources and the authority to help them and to do something more proactive about it, because it is a force, and we could shift it to have it be much more positive force than negative.
All right, we're almost at the end of our time, and you've shared and weaved in tips and tricks and loved, the warning signs. Is there anything else? Like maybe we, split it into two categories, right? Like schools and school leaders, educators. What are some tips and practical things that they can be doing in their classrooms and in their buildings? And then maybe what are some practical tips that you haven't already mentioned for families that just kind of succinctly outlines it for them?
Yeah. My tip would go across the two, which is that the more that you could collaborate with students on the standards, it's a really powerful thing. And so your first question about educators, what they could do is they could huddle with students about their tech policy in the classroom and come up with standards and classroom norms of how we use technology for good during the school day. And then families at home, you could send them a family standards agreement, and they could go through and they come up with their own standards, and you let them know, hey, every family's standards is different. So you could play gaming, be gaming at your friend's house, but we do things a little different here. And the more you can involve students in co-creating the standards, you get their buy-in. The catch is that you also have to live up to those standards at the same time as an adult. And so it's a win-win for everyone, including the students. So that would be my most practical advice, which has been so important to our success too as an organization, really collaborating with students.
I love that. I love that. This was super helpful. Okay, I do have one final question for you. And it's the question I ask all of my guests, and it is in the spirit of my company's name. All right. It is one box, big or small, that you hope to check off today.
Wow. I mean, a box that I like to check off every day is, my organization is certainly rooted in family values. And so a box I hope to check every day is just like being with my kids and having a good conversation around the dinner table. So practice what I preach for sure. And tonight, especially, we're building a fort. So we're particularly excited about that.
That's big business. I know it's pizza movie night on Fridays at our house, and we take it very seriously. And you're right. My girls give us, you said the adults have to live up to the standards. If we back out of pizza movie night, they're like, that's not what we do in the couch house. We do pizza movie night on Fridays.
That's awesome.
Like, are you not burned out on pizza? They're like, oh no, this is what we do.
They're like, that is in our core as a family. That is our family's core. So,
oh my goodness. Okay. Well, is there anything else? Like if a school's trying to find you, do y'all have any projects coming up? Tell us. I mean, I want people to be able to find you and tap into y'all's resources. So, before we sign off, what are some ways for them to work with you all?
Well, the family class, the tech classroom policy I mentioned, and the family standards agreement, you can find those resources at thesocialinstitute.com. We have so many different downloads, blog articles on the latest trends that students are facing around tech and social media and current events. And you better believe that we are on social media, so you could find us.
Can you imagine? That would be funny if you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have a Facebook or a LinkedIn. What are those things?
What is that? Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Missy.
This was great.
Appreciate the conversation.
Yes, no, and as like I said, as a mom, This is actually good and hopeful to hear that like just people are thinking about it. Cause it's like I'm not an expert in this area, right? So I'm gonna have to, when the time comes, lean on people who have the skill sets and like their research in the background to be able to like educate me on how to navigate it within my own household and, hopefully mitigate any of the negative consequences and really have an uptick in the positive impact of it. So.
Right.
All right. Well, this was great. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Good luck with your fort. Maybe that needs to get posted on your social media so I can see it and be inspired. But yes, anyways, thank you. Have a great weekend and thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for listening to today's Pro Series conversation. Our team is always looking for more pros to learn from in the field of education. So if you have a recommendation for a future guest, or maybe you are the pro, then send us a note at info@checkboxpro.com. And if you want to hear from more pros, then like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. And by doing so, this also helps more folks find our show. So take a moment to check that box off your list today.